councillors and members of the public. Before we commence the meeting, I would, as usual, draw your attention to the fire regulations which are on the screen behind me and the small screen at the side of the public gallery. Can you please ensure that your mobile phones are switched to silent? And councillors, can I please remind you to speak directly into the microphone and make sure that your card is pushed firmly into the console. Moving on to the items of business. The minutes of the meeting which took place on the 2nd of November 2016 have been laid on the table for the last 30 minutes. Are you content that I sign these as a correct record of that meeting? Thank you. Have there been any apologies for absence, Gary?
Yes, Chairman, we've received apologies for absence from Councillor Mike Band, Kevin Denis and Michael Goodrich.
Thank you. Have members declared any interest before the meeting?
We haven't received any prior to the meeting, Chairman.
Very good. Do members have any other non-pecuniary or disclosable pecuniary interest to declare? Councillor Gray.
Yes, can I declare that I'm actually a parish council member, although on this matter I have not discussed it within the parish council. I excluded myself.
Thank you. Have there been any questions received from members of the public, Gary?
None received, Chairman.
Thank you. Right, Peter, are there any updates to government guidance or legislation that the committee should be aware of?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I have two matters to update the committee on. The first relates to an amendment to Part 16 of the General Permitted Development Order, which relates to permitted development rights afforded to electronic communications code operators, so telecoms type apparatus. The main changes comprise changes to emergency uses. The period for which land may be used in an emergency has been extended from 6 months to 18 months and now includes a requirement to notify Natural England if works are located within a triple SI. In terms of new masts, prior approval is now required for masts in AOMBs and in conservation areas of up to 20 metres in height, and masts on undesignated land of up to 25 metres in height or 20 metres where it is adjacent to a highway or on a highway. In terms of alterations and replacement masts, prior approval is now required for increasing the height of masts on unprotected land to a height greater than the existing mast or up to 25 metres in height. Again, it's 20 metres on a highway. On Article 2.3 land, which is the AOMB or conservation areas, the amendments set a height to that of the existing mast or up to 20 metres, so it carries across the new allowances for new masts. In terms of building-based apparatus, no limitations now apply to the installation, alteration or replacement under of small cell systems on buildings which are not dwelling houses or within the curtilage of dwelling houses, although this development does remain subject to conditions. Just to confirm what small cell systems are, these comprise low-powered radio access sort of nodes that operate under licence and in the unlicensed spectrum as well, and they have a sort of range of like 10 metres of up to 1 to 2 kilometres in range. There's also an update to the National Planning Practice Guidance. Effectively, there's a number of areas on, a lot of it's to do with neighbourhood plans, but there's a number to do with decision making as well. So I haven't highlighted them all. There's about 10 or 12 additional pages or revised pages, but I've just pulled out the key headlines in terms of decision making that you'll see us refer to if that's relevant. There's an updated sort of model checklist for a site-specific flood risk assessments, so that informs the provision of flood risk assessments. Revised wording regarding planning obligations, although this only makes reference to the current 3 statutory SIL tests, which we already apply if we're looking for obligations or contributions from site. Confirmation that affordable housing contributions should not be sought from small-scale and self-build development. A requirement for the LPA to notify the Environment Agency if planning permission is granted for new development likely to lead to a deterioration of a water body. Advice regarding funding of wastewater treatment, and advice regarding a type of properties that not be required to pay the community infrastructure or an infrastructure levy as and when we start charging that. As I say, there's a lot of detail behind that, and I intend to follow this up with an email with a link to the guidance and the updated regulations, but I'm happy to take any points or questions on that or follow that up outside of the meeting. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Peter. Do any of the members have any immediate questions? I think we'll all wait the email with interest. Thank you. Just a note that if, in the event of site inspections being necessary as a result of consideration of the application at this committee, this will be held on Monday the 9th of January 2017 at a time to be agreed. Hopefully that won't be necessary because there was a site meeting earlier this week. Now, to move on to the application under consideration, item A1, reference WA 2016-1853, land north of junctions with Hurlands Lane and Rotham's Great Copse, Knighton's Lane, Dunsfold. Miles, would you like to introduce the application to the committee, please?
Thank you very much, Chair. This is an application for two houses. In fact, it's a revision of a scheme submitted under WB's, our reference WA 2015-1642. In a nutshell, it's to demolish 214 square metres of existing buildings on site and the erection of two four-bedroom dwellings with associated detached garages with a combined floor area of circa 575 square metres and associated hard surfacing and landscaping. Before I go further, I perhaps should refer you to the update sheet. And just to go through this, at page 7, just to clarify, it's not gross internal area, but gross external floor area, GEFA, which relates to the tables below. And to clarify that on the previous scheme, overall for plot 1, there's 30.1 square metres less floor space proposed, and for plot 2, 22.9 square metres overall of floor space proposed. Just to go down, there's some minor changes in page 10, save policies. Policy M14 is changed to M4. Page 16, paragraph 3, changed WA 2016-1640 to WA 2015-1640. Page 17, there's a couple of replacements, do with R, not with note, and again the previous scheme replacing that to WA 2015-1640 and replacing in page 27, paragraph 3, line 2, 2 with not 2. Just to carry on now with the scheme, it is approximately 0.36 hectares in area off Knighton's Lane in Rotham Great Copse. On the left, the plan is a site location plan. This shows the site, and within that you do see the area which has been cleared over time. The access actually is through a track which is to the north of the site, and that leads into the site from the south. What we'll see in the other plans is a significant build-up of material and bunds to the south-southeast of the site. This here's a proposal. As you see, it retains the track in, using this access track, and both plot 1 and plot 2, both houses are accessed off this road here. The bunds around here, yeah, and I beg your pardon, and here's plot 1 to the rear of the site. This is a track road around here. This is plot 2. The access road comes through here for plot 1, comes down here for plot 2. At the moment there's bund around here which would be reduced to landscaping and access on the site. These are plot 1, these are the elevations. As you see, it's matching the properties in the surrounding area, in the sense that you know, it's roughly the Surrey vernacular, 4 bedrooms. These kind of elevations, plot 2, are similar, albeit slightly smaller. This here is the area of spoil, which you might be able to pick out in red around the site, which will be largely cleared and form part of this bund around the southeast as well, which itself will be reduced in height. This gives you an overview too of the floor areas for both plots and the elevations as well. Going forward, here's some photographs. You see some of the buildings on site, they're fairly dilapidated. There's some vehicles parked on site, some have been there for a great time. If you look over here, there is the Buns here with the woodland abutting the site, just outside the site boundary. Here's more example of a site that's been cleared and also materials deposited. Some of the vehicles, this disused polytunnel is actually just outside the application site from a former activity long discontinued, and here further photographs of the vehicles on site and the spoil on site as well. Now, if you look at the determining issues, the principle of development, this is a countryside, this is designated countryside beyond the green belt. The land is used sporadically as a contractor's yard. An application for a certificate of lawfulness was submitted this year, but it was refused because the evidence we felt being submitted wasn't sufficient to suggest that it used to be continuous for 10 years. Therefore, the use of the land is agricultural. It's also in an AGLV, it's also ancient woodland, designated ancient woodland around it washes over the site as well. Now, this is at least 1.7 metres from Dunsfold settlement, and therefore we conclude that this is an unsustainable location, and therefore the principle for two houses here is not acceptable. I've spoke a little about the planning histories as well. I'll deal a little bit about the certificates. I'll also deal with the revised scheme. The previous scheme under 2015-1640 was for two houses as well, with a similar kind of access and layout, albeit for larger houses, perhaps slightly more imposing. And this one, this amendment has been submitted to try and mitigate some of the objections. But I think it might be instructive to explain to you that we need to overcome the objections, those reasons for refusal, from the previous scheme. And if I quickly read through them, the first reason was that the proposal, as a result of the location and remoteness from a recognised settlement, will constitute isolated new homes in the countryside and constitute an unsustainable form of development. It is considered that there are no special circumstances to justify setting aside this policy, including those set out in policies C2, M2 and M4 of the Waverley Borough Local Plan 2002 and paragraph 55 of the National Plan Policy Framework 2012. The second reason is that as a result of the site in scale and form, the development would cause material and detrimental harm to the intrinsic character, beauty and openness of the countryside, contrary to policies C2, D1 and D4 of the Waverley Local Plan and paragraph 17 of the MPPF 2012. The third reason relates to its setting in the AGLV, within which the landscape character is to be conserved and enhanced. The proposed by virtue of a significant development in a remote countryside location, visible from the public realm, would have a permanent and detrimental impact on the landscape character of the AGLV, and therefore this is inconsistent with the aims of conserving and enhancing the landscape character and would conflict with policy C3 of the Waverley Borough Local Plan 2002. And the final one relates to the proposed development resulting in the foreseeable denudation of adjacent ancient woodlands and create an unsustainable juxtaposition likely to lead to further deterioration of the valuable resources, which will be detrimental to biodiversity and the visual amenity and character of the area. The proposal is therefore contrary to policies C7, C11, D1, D4, D5 and D7 of the Waverley Local Borough Plan 2002 and paragraph 118 of the MPPF. Now the differences we feel aren't sufficient enough to overcome those four objections, and an argument about this being replacing a bad neighbour development, what's existing on site, in planning terms doesn't hold water, we feel, because it's not an authorised use, it's not an established use. The certificate of lawfulness was refused, and therefore that wouldn't apply in this situation. I mean, the location of the development there, that would also tie in with countryside beyond the green belt. It's not a sustainable location, officers feel, and therefore, in comparison with, in relation to reasons 1 to 3, which I spelt out, these objections remain. Now, the impact on highways access and parking spaces, no objection has been received from the County Highways Authority. But in terms of trees, objection has been received from council arboriculturalists for the adverse impact on the ancient woodlands. In terms of biodiversity and contaminated land, insufficient information with regards to contaminated land has been submitted according to environmental health. In terms of ecology, they feel too, as do environmental health, that these conditions could be, shortcomings could be overcome by imposition of conditions should planning permission be granted. In terms of matters of judgment, we feel that we can demonstrate a 5-year housing supply, and that being the case, we could, this would provide a modest addition to the council housing supply. And the impact on landscape character, again, referring back to the third reason for refusal, despite more modest houses being proposed, there is still a significant urbanising effect, we feel, on a countryside location, and it would have an adverse impact on the landscape character. I think in terms of design issues and a remoteness of the site in terms of residential amenity, there are no adverse impacts, and therefore in these issues they accord with policy. And I would just conclude that I think in a nutshell it doesn't overcome the 4 reasons for refusal, and consequently that's officer's recommendation that this planning application be refused.
Thank you, Miles. This is a public speaking item. The procedure is detailed on the back of the laminated cards on your seats, and I believe the procedure has been explained to you. No opponents or members of the town or parish council registered to speak, so may I invite the supporter, Michelle Harvey, to speak. Good evening, Mrs. Harvey. You have 4 minutes from the time when you start speaking.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman, councillors and officers. As I'm aware, the site visit has been conducted and the councillors have had the opportunity to see the site themselves. The application site and the woodland have been owned by the applicant's family for over 70 years. Nigel and Nick Garrick, the applicants and grandchildren of the original owners, began to operate their businesses from the site in the early 1980s and used the land and buildings within the clearing as a builder's yard and groundworker's yard, and it's still in that use today. The site and the woodland is a special place for the Garrick family as it's a link to their grandparents, and the woodland will be kept within the family for future generations to enjoy. The officer's report contains a recommendation for refusal. I'll address each of these reasons in turn. Firstly, the suggestion that the isolated homes in the countryside will be created is wholly unreasonable given the proximity of the proposal to a cluster of other houses and buildings at the junction of Rams Lane, Knighton's Lane and Hurtlands Lane. The site is within easy walking distance of the Dunsfold settlement, which offers a range of facilities. The next 3 reasons for refusal have been addressed by a specialist consultant, John Etchells, who prepared a landscape and visual impact assessment which was submitted with the application, and this appears to have been given little weight in the officer's report. The assessment examined the impact of the proposals on the countryside, the AGLV and the surrounding woodland. The report concludes that the degree of change to the local landscape will be minor. There will be 2 new dwellings, but the essential character of the area around the site would not change. There would also be some beneficial local landscape effects as a result of the cessation of the existing uses and the removal of the buildings, materials, plant and vehicles presently on the site. The assessment has found that as a result of the enclosed nature of the site, the fact that the development will take place on a site clearly in use as a groundworks yard, the nature of the proposals and the partially settled character of the landscape around the site, there would be no significant harm to the intrinsic character, beauty and openness of the countryside, and therefore there's no conflict with the policy cited. There would also be no significant detrimental effects on the character or quality of the AGLV. The 2 new houses have defined curtilages, which are separate from the woodland, which would be retained in the ownership of the applicant. Due to the family history of the site, the applicant overwhelmingly wishes to retain the ancient woodland in its current form. The applicant has got no desire whatsoever to cause any harm to the woodland. In fact, a woodland management order scheme has been in place with the Forestry Commission since 2002 to protect it. In summary, Anyone visiting the site has to agree that the proposal would offer significant improvement over the current situation and activities at the site. The proposals have wholeheartedly been supported by the local residents who have written numerous letters. It would be sad if the local authority goes against the wishes of the local residents. This is a clear opportunity to improve the site once and for all and to deliver 2 much-needed houses without any adverse planning consequences. We have listened to and responded to the previous reasons for refusal and have presented a revised and reduced scheme on this basis. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Harvey. Members, now I open it up to you.
My fault, I pressed it twice. Yes, I was saying that it's a very good presentation there. I think I'm struggling a bit with some of the officers' comments. On the site visit, we saw the activity that was there, the groundworking business. We saw the height of the mounds that had been put there. We saw the vehicles and the equipment, and we saw a working diesel tank. So obviously this was a site that was in use. However, the site's not in keeping with the surrounding areas. The site is somewhat obscured from the road, as would be the development. I think a comment was made about housing. I mean, housing in Waverley context, 2 houses is very insignificant. Housing in respect of Dunsfold, it is much more significant. This would be 2 houses out of the 38 that Dunsfold has to find. Dunsfold is a rural community. It's spread out over a number of roads as well as clustering around the common. The common itself is 50% woodland, and the trees there is a feature, the trees generally are a feature of the village. And the village does have a shortage of houses of this type and quality. A number of houses in this particular area have been, I would say, unrealistically expanded to the extent that they've taken them out of a standard 4-bedroomed houses. Now, these 2 would fit in very well in terms of that demand in the village. The officers say that the location is isolated. It is a rural village. In fact, it's not isolated, it's on a crossroads. A crossroad is inhabited. There's a cluster of about 15 houses in the area. That's in Rams Lane, in Hurlands Lane, and going back and forwards up Knighton's Lane. I think there's an issue about the intrinsic character and beauty and the openness of the countryside here, but we've seen the impact that this site has on the countryside. It's not an attractive site, and this is one of the reasons that the surrounding residents have supported the application. And as far as I'm aware, there are no residents' objections to this particular development. Under reason 3, again, we go back to the neighbourhood and what sort of impact this would have. I think again, 2 houses in here properly developed would have far less impact than what's there at the moment. And I think the one that I find quite strange is the last one. And I'm not being critical of officers. This is because of my local knowledge and the way the village values trees and woodland. There has been no detriment, even on what's there at the moment, to the surrounding woodland, and there wouldn't be with the development. The development it doesn't involve pulling those trees down. The family is committed to maintaining the woodland as it has done for many years. And in fact, I think that it was accepted by officers that improvements to the woodlands could be, and the biodiversity could be attained by putting conditions. So you gather that I'm somewhat in favour of this. In favour is it because of local circumstances, local conditions. I do accept the issues that have been brought out by officers, but I do think it merits this committee to give it serious considerations, and that's why I called it in, and that's why I was glad that the site visit was attended by the majority of people at the meeting tonight. So subject to what I hear from my colleagues, I would not be in favour of rejecting this. I'd be in favour of approving this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gray. Councillor Henry.
Thank you, Chairman. This is a complex application, and I can well understand the frustrations of the applicants. The 60 years of planning history, the inability to button down the lawful use of the site, from a small parcel of land, a little under an acre in a woodland setting, bequested to the family some three generations ago, a small holding which over the years has become a modest facility for landscape and groundwork. It is a primitive site with primitive facilities. I wouldn't consider it myself a brownfield site, and certainly the proposed application would not be termed a bad neighbour development. So would there be demonstrable harm or significant conflict within the environmental objectives with this site outside the village settlement? A development favoured by the neighbours but opposed by the parish council. I much look forward to hearing the debate of my fellow councillors, and I thank you for organising the site visit the other day. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Henry. Councillor Wojciechowski.
Thank you, Chairman, and I would like to say thank you to Councillor Gray. This was one of those site visits where, when you read on paper, you get a very different feel for it when you go onto the site, and certainly whilst I would never predetermine any application, I looked at this and I thought, well, there's so many considerations in here. But having gone to the site and seen it for myself, I really had a change of heart, and listening to what the residents have said this evening, I also feel the same way. I think it's an excellent report. Sadly, I'm afraid that I cannot agree with the recommendation, whilst I wholeheartedly understand why. But I think this is an exception to the rules. I think it's a unique site. I think John's point, Councillor Gray's point about two extra houses in a village of that size is very, very important. The site is in the AGLV, but this site is a blight on the landscape as it currently is. What worries me more than anything else is the future of the site, and if we don't do anything about it, we have an opportunity here to clean the site up and do something with it. The thing that struck me about the site is how silent it was, how deadly silent it was. You could hear a pin drop, and I would imagine when there's works going on in and around the area, it must be quite, difficult for some of the neighbours nearby. I don't know that. That's just my thoughts on it. It is remote, it is rural, but it is within a settlement area. There are houses around there. So for one, I think the end justifies the means here. We can do something with the site. We can safeguard its future. We can proactively create 2 new dwellings that will be needed within the Dunsfold area, and I think it'll just be a tremendous improvement on what is currently there, which for now is just a complete dumping ground, and as I said before, it's actually a blight on the landscape. So thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to speak? Oh, sorry, Councillor Seaborn.
Thank you, Chairman. I agree very much with the points that colleagues have made. The officer's recommendation to refuse, I guess, could lead to one of two circumstances. Either it's a do-nothing, status quo preserved, and as Councillor Wojciechowski has just said, it is. I've found it a blot on the landscape. It's not a pleasant site, and it doesn't seem fitting for that environment. I suppose the other alternative is that we actually take enforcement action and get the site tidied up, since it hasn't been proved to be lawful. So it'd be interesting to hear the officer's comment on what would happen if we support the recommendation to refuse. Because if nothing's going to happen, then I'm minded to support colleagues' views that the housing proposal actually will make the site infinitely more desirable for the whole community than it is now. And I can certainly see my way to arguing against at least a couple of the reasons presented. So perhaps officers would care to comment on what happens if we do support a rejection.
Certainly. Before I ask the officers to come in, Councillor Stewart-Stennett.
Thank you, Chairman. Like my fellow councillors, I think it's a good idea. It gives us control over the site, as it is at the moment. As you all know, I'm in that business anyway. And to have control over the site is very important. And if enforcement was taken against that, it would cost a fortune to enforce, and we don't want to be in that situation. I wholeheartedly respect the report from the officers, but I'm afraid I can't agree with it, and I'd like to vote for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Would you like to speak, Councillor Byron, before the officers come in?
Thank you, yes. Well, like others have said, I mean, it was a eureka moment arriving on that site, having read the report and finding such a tremendous amount of equipment and materials that have obviously been there for some considerable time. It's been a working yard. And indeed, if we look at the relevant planning history, the first time that Waverley got involved in terms of a planning application was a certificate of lawfulness in 2007, which was refused. So that's nigh on 10 years, and I don't remember in those 10 years it ever appearing on anything to do with the enforcement action that we needed to be taken throughout the eastern area, having been a councillor for a previous 10 years to that. So we've heard nothing at all about it, and yet I understand the officer's problem in trying to create the information, or to find the information to make it as a lawful site, but it clearly has been used as a builder site, etc., broadly as described in the various applications over a period, and it's, well, we have to have those sites somewhere, but I think the change is clearly supported by the local residents, and it's an ideal improvement to the landscape. Keeping that woodland safe is obviously of importance to us, and it appears to them, so I have to concur with my colleagues.
Thank you. Officers, would you like to comment? And can I just ask a question? Is there anything in the application that suggests where the business would be relocating to, if at all?
Thank you, Chairman. Just pick up on that first question. I'm not aware that we've got that information in terms of the business before us, but I mean, it's saying it's a business there, but we have got to be mindful that it hasn't demonstrated a lawful use. There is an open enforcement file on the site that we're aware of. So picking up on your point, there is the possibility, if it's not supported, as the previous application wasn't, to take further action. I'm not going to at this stage say what that action might be. We'd need to assess that further, so I can't, that's not something we can make a decision on here tonight. So really that would be down to members to decide where they feel they are in terms of the site. If it was to be refused, we will reassess the position on enforcement and take appropriate action to deal with it. In terms of the points regarding history, there is a long-serving history on it, and they have tried to demonstrate the lawful use, but there's been a number of different uses sort of tried to demonstrate through that, so you've got to take account of that. And I appreciate looking at the site, turning up at the site, an untidy site, if I think some of the words you used, that does need to be taken into account, but you do need to take into account that shouldn't be rewarded for a reason for granting permission, so it needs to be balanced on that basis. So we do need to take account of that, but I'll leave that as a judgment for members, but hopefully that picked up on the questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gray, you wish to come back?
Not my night, is it? One was the question of enforcement. I mean, it was asked, and I'm not aware that any enforcement action has been taken over the last 10 years. There may be an enforcement file. I know there was an issue with that was referred to Surrey in terms of waste, and there was an investigation, and that basically proved it went nowhere, and it was handed back to Waverley. It's my understanding of that. And I think that's an important point. We've got a site here that's been there for a long time. whether it's got certificate of lawfulness or not, I think that, and I don't want to put words in their mouth, but had there been a certificate of lawfulness here, then the decision might have been more finely balanced. That was a discussion, I think, that we had on site there. But I think that's almost irrelevant. It's here that I don't think that necessarily that we are rewarding the owners by granting this planning application. I think we're rewarding the local residents for their patience and for what they put up with over that period of time, and we have solved a problem once and for all with quite a lot of benefits for the local community. Thank you for letting me come back.
Thank you. Councillor Wojciechowski.
Yes, thank you, Chairman, and thank you for allowing me to come back. When we look at these reports, you know, we look at the consultees that we've gone out to, and the parish council, although they've objected to this application, the residents clearly have not, and they want this change. So, you know, I think that in itself speaks volumes. Also about the tree and landscape officer, it doesn't concur with what was there on the site, and we also know about, and we've heard, we learned from the site about there is a management programme, so that ancient woodland has to be looked after. Enforcement it's long, it's expensive, it's painful, it could go on for years. Is there a case there? Who knows? Had we got a certificate of lawfulness on this site, it would have made it a brownfield site. Therefore, we wouldn't be having a discussion about this. We'd be saying there's permitted, you can build on this site. So we've got to be careful which road we go down, because the outcome could be the same in the end. But let's not waste time going down that road and actually make a decision tonight that's the right one. And I believe the right one is to allow, bearing in mind these are unique, unusual circumstances, but I think they're justified in this case given the future of that site and, as I say, an area surrounding great landscape. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Peter, did you wish to comment? No? Okay, so any last questions before we move to the recommendation? Okay. So the recommendation is that permission be refused for the reasons 1 to 4 and informatives 1 to 2 as set out in the report. May I have those in favour of the recommendation to refuse?
That's 0.
And those against?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's 8.
And abstaining myself because I couldn't make the site visit, so I can't make a judgment. Thank you, members. The recommendation to refuse is rejected. So we need someone to propose a granting of permission, but I think first perhaps we should discuss any conditions that the officers might like attached to such a planning permission. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. In terms of conditions, obviously it's an overturn from a recommendation for approval. So before we get to that, maybe if I could just ask members via Chairman, we need to set out the reasons for granting, contrary to the policy or recommendation for approvals set out. So I'd ask members to explain against the reasons for refusal why they think it should be granted. I'm happy to put that in a word form, but we do need to do that, and that does need to be minuted before we move to that point. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Members.
I think the first one would be that it's an enhancement to the landscape, not a detriment against what was here. So it is an enhancement. My other point, which I think is a very important one from seeing the site visit, is that it isn't going to harm the woodlands. If anything, this will improve the opportunities for the woodlands and give us the opportunity of putting conditions in there that will help the biodiversity of the site. So they're my two.
Councillor Wojciechowski.
Thank you. If I may add, Chairman, that I believe it would currently improve the visual amenity.
Thank you. Can we also put in that the committee considered that it's the location and remoteness wasn't an issue? Thank you. Would that be enough for you, Peter, to put together, and then presumably you'd use all the standard conditions for new houses?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Yes, we can summarise that. So effectively the members are saying they don't think it's an isolated location, so it wouldn't conflict with paragraph 55 and the local plan policies. That's the key thing. We need to explain why we think it complies with policy. In terms of the paragraph 118 of the MPPF in terms of ancient woodland and local policies C7, D1, D4. I don't think there will be harmful impacts on the ancient woodland through encroachment onto that. And the final point, which is combined on 2 and 3, there's not harm to the countryside, or not considered a harm to the countryside or the OGLV, and therefore it doesn't conflict with the objectives of policies C2 and C3. So hopefully that's comfortable. But Miles has put together a list of conditions. We'd rather just check that you're happy with those, if that's okay. Thank you, Chairman.
Yes, please, Miles.
Some of the things to consider, standard conditions that would be for any kind of development, like standard time condition. I think for this site, construction environmental management plan, tree protection plan, landscaping scheme, details and materials and levels. In terms of ecology, a precautionary working methodology to be submitted pre-commencement for approval. Development, obviously, in accordance with plans. I propose to remove permitted development rights so we could control any further proposed extensions to what's permitted. Also, what came up in the ancient woodland from Natural England and from ecology was this idea of maintaining a 50-metre buffer zone between the ancient woodland and hard surfacing. 15, that is 15. Sorry, just for clarification. And also looking at more standard conditions like refuse storage, cycle storage details to be submitted. I don't think that's exhaustive at the moment, but I think that covers most of what I can think of at present, which is likely to be relevant and enforceable.
Councillor Gray.
Would you consider putting in some form of condition on the contamination? Yes. Or would you cover that in your standard?
That was an oversight by me.
Yeah.
Statement pre-commencement. So there will be a number of pre-commencement conditions that will be applied. Yes.
Okay, is there anything we can put in to prevent the current use of the site shift into another section of ancient woodland?
Thank you, Chairman. Unfortunately not, no. Obviously there's a requirement, there would be a requirement for a change of use of land, and we'd hope they'd seek the appropriate permissions if that was to take place, but we couldn't reasonably apply that, I don't think. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I have a proposer and a seconder then for? Okay.
I would propose.
The revised recommendation is that permission be granted, subject to the conditions that we've just discussed and any informatives that the officers feel necessary. Could I have all those in favour of that proposition, please?
That's 8.
None against, 1 abstention again.
Okay.
So that application is granted permission. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you.